Hello, Sooner Nation, OU Insider subscribers, Coach Brian Clinton enthusiasts, people whose heads are spinning from the transfer portal and everything that is going on in college football, because it gets crazier and crazier every year. And the center of that chaos might actually be in Norman, Oklahoma. It feels like it's becoming that way every year, Brian. This is the podcast for you. This is another episode of the Oklahoma Drill, a podcast fueled by OU Insider and the Rivals Network. And I am joined, as always, by Brian Clinton. Brian, I'll be honest, with everything that's happening, I was worried you were going to hit the transfer portal and look for another podcast elsewhere.
Yeah, I thought about it. But they're paying me quite well here, and I didn't want to run the risk of losing that. So I figured I might as well stick around,
You're supposed to say loyalty. You feel
that loyalty is dead today. It's all about the money.
You joke, but kind of.
That's honestly, that's the truth.
It's kind of true.
Yeah.
Brian, God, since we last recorded, it feels like OU's entire roster hit the portal. Mm-hmm. And then OU also found out where they're playing in the bowl game. We're going to Fort Worth, baby. We're going to the Dallas-Fort Worth area to cover Oklahoma in the Armed Forces Bowl against Navy, a team that has a regular season game still. They're playing Army this weekend, but they're playing Navy. We're going to talk about that a little bit, Brian, a little bit later, but it feels like part of the context of even evaluating or analyzing that game is through everything that's happened in the portal, because is OU going to have any players for that game?
Yeah, I don't know.
They might not. I'm trying to. So since we last spoke, I don't even know. So this morning, Angela Anthony hit the portal. We've had Jalil Farouk hit the portal. We've had Nick Anderson and Jaquez Petaway hit the portal. JJ Hester has hit the portal. We've got Garen Hatchett that's hit the portal. Dasan McCullough that's hit the portal. Makari Vickers has hit the portal. Am I missing any of the big names? I think those are the big names, right? Outside of like Jackson Arnold, and we talked about that last week.
Garen Hatchett.
Yeah, we did. Garen Hatchett hit.
I think you said Kenai Walker. It's hard to keep up with.
Oh yeah, Kenai Walker's hitting the portal.
There's a lot of names out there.
Brian, the one thing that's clear, and let's talk about the wide receiver room for a second. So, OU's losing 5 of their receivers as of now. Now, it's hard to even. I think some people have said, I think there was optimism that Jalil Farouk was going to stay.
Yeah.
Things changed.
Yeah.
I think there was optimism about Nick Anderson staying. Things changed. Angela Anthony, I think there was less optimism than a couple of those other guys. And I've had a couple people ask me, why isn't this stuff being relayed faster? It's because so much can change in 24 hours in the portal for any of these guys. The reality is we'll see what happens with Deion Burks and Jaden Gibson. I think Jaden Gibson, his tweet yesterday, I believe, would seem to indicate that he's sticking around, but it's even hard to say that, because is anyone going to be shocked if Jaden Gibson hits the portal? No.
Yeah. Right.
One thing that's clear, Brian, is they're going to have to rebuild the wide receiver room through the portal. They're going to have to, especially because they didn't get a trio of receivers in the 2025 freshman class. All of a sudden, that starts to feel hurtful. This is, before I turn this to you, Brian, there's so much that goes through my head when talking about the portal and everything that's happened with Oklahoma. I don't know how the lesson or the takeaway, if you're an Oklahoma fan, isn't. I don't know how the takeaway isn't to not assume anything, because going into the season, Oklahoma had arguably the deepest, experienced, maybe the most talented receiver room in the country. Fast forward 5 months and it's gone. It's gone. I just where does this receiver room go from here, man? And how decimating is this?
Well, you know, I'm sitting here looking at the numbers as you often do.
Big numbers guy.
Yeah, Farouk, Anderson, Anthony are like your big three that have hit the portal for Oklahoma, just as far as like names as in wide receiver as the wide receiver room goes. Um, any guess on how? I'm sure you know this, but any guess at how many snaps those three guys have combined for this season?
So Angel Anthony played eight snaps,
6.
6. Nick Anderson played 9,
Okay.
right? And then Jalil Farouk.
I've got 5 on pass on PFF, but I could
PFF's
be
wrong.
I agree. Yeah.
Farouk played 10 against Temple, and then he played, was it 24 against Missouri? Did he play 34 snaps this year?
24 total is what PFF has.
Pro Football Focus is lying.
Yeah, I've got 35, but either way, or 35 total amongst the three. But like either way,
sorry, I ruined that. I ruined your game.
Either way, it doesn't matter. Like we're looking at snaps. It's less than 100 for those three combined. JJ Hester, out of necessity, he's got 241 here on the rep count. So like that's going to be your biggest loss. Jaquez Petaway 57. So like again, they're big names, but when you look at things, obviously Oklahoma's offense was broken this year. Like that's we know that it was as bad as it's ever been in my lifetime, and I'm looking at how the offense needs to be built going forward. I don't want to say that replacing a guy like Nick Anderson is easily done because it's not. But at the same time, I think Oklahoma can't afford to roll the dice on guys being able to be available next year or not. Like you need guys with a proven track record that can go out there and play, can be available. And, it's probably not a bad idea to have, a change of scenery for both those guys and that room altogether. I don't think that's a bad thing. So it's tough to see that many guys from one position group leave, but in the same breath, I think it's probably something that's going to, with time, people are going to start to realize that that's going to be a primary focus of this staff in the portal, addressing those needs. And this is probably all just part of the plan.
I have to say, as an aside, I'm looking at Pro Football Focus right now, Brian, and I was dead on. It's got 8 snaps for Andrell. It's got 8 snaps for Andrell, 9 for Nick, 34 for Jalil.
So 50. So 50-ish snaps.
51.
Yeah.
So I win.
You win.
Brian.
You win.
Point
still stands.
Yeah, no, it absolutely no. That what's the difference? That's 15 snaps or whatever.
Right.
I think here's the hard part for me, Brian. Here's the hard part, because everything you just said is absolutely right. And I think one thing that I think is hard to factor into all of this is that with salary cap like changes coming, and with the need for Oklahoma to get their roster down to 105, which they still need to do, and that's without even adding anybody in the portal.
Yeah.
There's going to have to be at least 10 more dudes probably hit the portal just for OU to be able to add some guys.
That's just wild.
I think Tom from Sooners Illustrated, I think before Deshaun and Andrell announced they're hitting the portal, I think he had it at 111 scholarship players. So you're still even just scholarship guys. And obviously OU can add walk-ons, although that gets dicey too. There's still guys that are going to hit the portal, both out of not only necessity for a roster building standpoint, but also so the hard part, I think, if you're Oklahoma is, yeah, you look at all of these guys that are injured or that were injured this last year, and you have to decide how much is it worth. And we're going to have to start thinking about it in terms of this. How much of the cap are they worth?
Yeah.
Which is a weird thing to think about in college football.
It is.
But at the same time, I think we just saw that you can't assume anything. And especially in the portal, even if you go out and get 4 dudes in the portal, now you're basically looking at a completely rebuilt receiver group.
Mm-hmm.
Assuming they're not going to get hurt and assuming they can have an impact right away. Oh, and OU doesn't really know what its quarterback situation is yet.
Right.
Oh, and new OC.
Yeah.
It's just like all of a sudden there's this big mess of things, right?
Yeah. 2 things that I want to address in that statement. And look, we don't know. I mean, it obviously it appears that John Mateer is planning on at least staying for the bowl game at Washington State. Hasn't said anything about intentions of entering the transfer portal. Like, there hasn't been any mention. I think that's the assumption is still there by a lot of people that that's going to ultimately be what happens. And if and when that does happen, I think giving a quarterback and an offensive coordinator, having them on the same page coming into the season, I think is huge. Like, it's like having that's the most vital piece. If the quarterback knows how the offense can be run, the techniques really don't change all that much for an offensive lineman. Everything else can kind of just fit into space as they get together and work together. So there is that hope. If that does end up being the case, you've got a guy that's already well established. The second thing, last year, the situation you were in with the offensive line, going out and portaling guys and getting guys in, even though we saw some of the younger players start to progress there towards the end of the season and start playing better football, it was an absolute mess having an entire position group, offensive line-wise, from the portal. What I will say, though, is the easiest plug-and-play position that there is in football. It's not easy, but the easiest is wide receiver. That's the easiest. It doesn't matter where you go. A chain route is still a chain route. A post is a post. A slant is a slant. There are going to be nuances for every position coach out there that they want to focus on, but things can still be productive with new faces in the receiver room versus anywhere else. I mean, it's more difficult for a running back to come in and get the timing down. Offensive line, obviously, there's tons of nuances that we don't have time to get into there. But at wide receiver, if you can go and get some dudes, you should be able to see some production. Granted, they are healthy enough to stay on the field.
I agree. You're absolutely right. I think the question I have is, I think it's just, I think what I would recommend for fans is don't just have the mindset of, we'll just go out and get some dudes, because you actually have to go get them. That's correct. One.
Which is harder, which is much easier said than done today.
Well, and when you're an Oklahoma team that just went 6-6 and there's uncertainty at quarterback, like I said, you've got a new OC, and you're heading into a year where there's going to be uncertainty about Brent Venables' job.
Right.
And now with the salary cap coming, and it is coming, I do wonder, like, I was actually having a conversation about this with somebody a couple of days ago. Like I wonder what impact that's going to have, because you can't just say, "Oh, we'll give you X amount of dollars." It's just not. It's pretty soon. It's not going to work like that.
Right.
So you can't, like, nobody's gonna. I mean, now just this is excluding any under the table. You can't. I don't. I don't. I don't even want to get into that. But like from a purely salary
Now,
cap
Jesse,
standpoint, they wouldn't do that. That
never.
wouldn't happen. From a pure salary cap standpoint, even if you're Oklahoma, who desperately needs receivers,
Mm-hmm.
you, it's just not going to be as simple as, hey, we can give you X amount of dollars, because every other team is going to be able to allocate the same amount of money, because everybody's going to be operating under the same salary cap. Not to mention that because of the salary cap and everything that's moving, and this even comes with, with them getting Randall Stevenson, former AT&T CEO, OU alum, to come in and kind of help transition things to a more professional model, which Joe C sent out in an email last week. At some point, you're going to have to look at it like a NFL front office, where, okay, if we're operating with 20 to 21 to 22 million dollars, you can't spend 10 million on receivers. You have to use that money to build out your entire roster. That makes it so that's going to make it harder to build out the more money you spend on receivers, the less money you're going to have to spend on everything else. And I think we can all look at this receiver room and say, yeah, maybe it'll be better in the long run that these guys that were hurt all of last year, and in some cases like Nick Anderson and Angelo Anthony, who were hurt more than just this last year, maybe it's good you can get them out, but now you got to go get dudes. You've got to rebuild that roster room. And look, I don't think those changes are not coming right now. They're going to be implemented in the 25-26 season, more likely than not. But OU has to start thinking about this stuff now. So I think there's just such a big picture element to all of this.
Well, and I'm curious what that looks like, because the hope is that it returns everything to a status quo where, like you said, everybody is on an even playing field. And I mean, you'll still have haves and have-nots. There's going to be a middle ground, a middle tier of teams, which Oklahoma won't be a part of, but there's going to be teams that aren't able to hit that 20 million, whatever the cap ends up being. And then there's going to be some that just have no chance, like, some of the MAC teams and, just smaller programs. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out and what impact that has. But I think one of the biggest things right now, you're seeing a lot of teams, and I think Oklahoma's included in this, you better get them while you can. Like, that's kind of the feel that I get from just keeping up with everything on a national level with this transfer portal cycle. Is it really feels like the teams are pushing, you better get the big players while you can, because once this goes into effect, you're right, it's going to be a lot harder. You can't just throw money at people, and if you do, you're taking a risk, because it's going to be that under the table thing that we talked about. And I don't think that you don't hear about that happening in the NFL as much, if at all, because everything's managed by the NFL's front office. It's all tied in with general managers and owners and all of that stuff. And so there's not really this, it doesn't have that slimy feeling that it really kind of does right now. And I think that's just because of our expectations. It takes away from the amateurism of the sport. Like, we're just all adjusting to that still. But, I think the big thing that you're going to have to look for going forward is player retention. Like, how does Oklahoma and these other teams retain players that are incoming freshmen, because right now, like transfer guys, I have a pretty good feeling that there are guys in the transfer portal that are going to come into Oklahoma that are going to be making more money right now than established pieces on the roster. And I think that that's going to be an issue
Mhm.
for everybody going forward, because to get somebody in house, you're going to have to offer them something that they want, um, that makes it worth them leaving. And I think finding that balance is, yeah, it's going to be extremely difficult. And that's why you have to have a guy like Stevenson that knows the business side of things. At the end of the day, though, I do honestly, it is exciting for me because it allows the football coaches to coach football again.
No, it is, and I think, and I'm hoping to talk to Stevenson a little bit more in the coming weeks, especially kind of once we officially hit the off season, like after the bowl game. But Brian, here's the thing, and we need to talk about OU specific stuff, but I wanted to throw this at you. And Nate Downs, Ethan Downs' dad, had a couple of tweets earlier today that I think kind of encapsulated how I'm feeling if I'm just looking at the sport as a whole. And this ties in with OU football as well. Is Brian, this isn't sustainable. This is in no way sustainable. It's
Right.
it's just not. And the salary cap will fix some things. It's not going to fix everything. And you mentioned the key point of it there, which is retention. And there's gonna have to be something. They're gonna have to tie NIL money with contracts, something. And the hard
Yeah.
part of all of this is that these are still universities. These are still schools where
Right.
you go to class, and also
Right.
any discussion about changes of portal windows or signing days or anything else is going to have to fall into the remembrance of, hey, school ends, the fall semester ends every December and the spring semester starts every year in January.
Yep.
You have to think about that stuff too, because when you transfer to a new school, you have to take classes at that new school. So I think there's such a big picture way to look at this. But if you're this is a really tough spot for Brent Venables to be in, and for other coaches to be in, but especially Brent Venables, where there's uncertainty about your job. You're coming off of a 6-6 season, and now you've got to get the roster down to 105 because that's coming. You got to get it down. You're hoping to do that with guys that maybe aren't going to play, but some of these guys were definitely going to play. And now you've got to worry about the roster numbers and also bring in guys that can play right away. Oh, and also, as much as there's urgency to improve from 6-6 and get dudes that can play right away, what if you end up landing a bunch of guys with only 1 or 2 years of eligibility? Then you're not even really building anything. You're slapping band-aids on gaping wounds and eventually getting to a place where you're right back in the same situation a year from now. And even if you get guys that have 3 or 4 years of eligibility remaining, what if they leave the year after you get them?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is not NFL free agency. People call it that, or people refer to it. That is NFL free agency does not operate like this at all.
No, it actually has guidelines and rules and contractual obligations and things that keep players tied to organizations. Like it's there are things in place that ensure an investment is not going to turn around and bite you in a year. Right now, there just aren't anything. There's nothing in place to do that. And I think you kind of nailed it right there at the beginning of that last statement, where you said, you know, the salary cap's going to help some things, but it's not going to fix everything. I think that is where you have to focus. Schools like Oklahoma, the top 10% of schools in football, in regards to football, there's going to have to be some sort of CBA. Like there's going to have to be some sort of agreement where this money that's being allocated to roster management is set up in a way where players are only going to receive the money per games that they play or per years that they're on the roster. Like there's going to have to be some things built in to help with that retention because you're right. I mean, the only reason I'm using this example is because I wrote something earlier about him today. Micah Hudson, 5-star wide receiver at Texas Tech. Um, we know, I mean, there's numbers floating around out there for what he was paid for to come to Texas Tech. Um, Now that investment's lost, like, because it seems like he's headed to Texas A&M, and that 1 year investment to get a 5-star guy, like Texas Tech is out money without really anything to show for it. And like you have to, there's not going to be situations like that everywhere, but that's the risk that you run whenever you put yourself out there, and there's nothing contractually obligating players to stay. And so I think you're right. There's going to have to be some language, some business guidelines set in place, and having somebody like Oklahoma's gone out and got that is well versed in that realm is going to be a huge benefit. And if they don't, if there are schools out there that don't go about it this route and hope that they can just maintain what's going on right now, you're right. This is not. This is something that can be kept up. You're going to eventually hit a dead end on this.
Well, and this comes to where I think the dilemma that Brent Venables is facing right now, which is you have to, like, yes, there is tremendous pressure to turn things around right now, but you also have to build something. Yeah. You got to build something, which is where, look, there are some guys on OU's transfer portal targets. There are some guys that fit that bill to some extent. Guys that are proven guys or have shown things that you could potentially build around, right? Like I look at someone like Reggie Virgil out of Miami, Ohio, who well, I mean, he was a junior this year. Actually, I guess he only has 1 year of eligibility. So let me back up. That's a great guy that OU needs to go get. But even if you go get somebody like that, you're still you're probably only getting them for a year.
Right.
But also, I think OU needs to get Reggie Virgil.
Well, and here's the thing is like, and again, you're right. We need to focus on Oklahoma stuff. This is an Oklahoma podcast, but like, look at, okay, this will be a good connection. Oklahoma played Arizona in the Valero Alamo Bowl to end the year last year. Guys like Gunnar Maldonado, Tacario Davis, Dalton Johnson, like that secondary at Arizona was really good. Picked Jackson Arnold off a few times. All three of those guys that I just mentioned have entered the portal in the last 24 hours. Those are guys that were all Pac-12, all Big 12. Like, I mean, excellent defenders. A school like Arizona that goes 10-3 once in a generation, how in the world are they supposed to compete with? Because tampering is going on. It's run rampant. You ask anybody that has anything, any kind of idea about what's going on, it's run rampant. And so it's tough because those are guys that have multiple years of eligibility left, a couple of them at least, and they're going to go and finish out their career somewhere else getting paid more money. And it's really hard to see an entire room like that leaving and being spread out when a small school does the work and lands those kinds of guys, and now it's all for naught.
Good point. The guy I think I was really thinking of, and it's so hard to keep all of this straight, but it's Isaiah Sigtegna out of
From
Arkansas,
Arkansas, yes.
who's a redshirt sophomore this past year. He would have 2 years of eligibility. He is of great interest to Oklahoma. I believe he's visiting um, here. That's the kind of guy. Now, is he going to be a superstar if OU gets him? I don't know, but I almost think that's kind of where Oklahoma is at some point you can't be in a position where you're looking for like where you're feeling pressure to get 1 year rentals.
Right.
Yeah. So
yeah, because high school recruiting still has to be the lifeblood of your.
that's
You can't. If everybody follows the Colorado route, you're going to fall flat on your face, and I think people are going to see that whenever Shadir Sanders and Travis Hunter aren't there next year. You have to have you cannot go and do these 1 year rental things. These deals are going to end. You're going to end up. I hate to use the comparison, but you're going to end up like Nebraska. You will put all of your eggs in one basket, and when things don't play out that year, like if this situation ends up biting Brent Venables, and I'm not saying it's going to, but if it ends up biting Brent Venables, and they go out and get a bunch of 1 year guys and it doesn't work next year, not only are you probably losing your coaching staff and all those guys that don't have any eligibility left, everybody that's young and has any kind of talent whatsoever is going to be either whisked away by somebody who is tampering, or they're going to leave and find a better opportunity. Like, it's a dangerous game to play.
it's an unenviable situation that Brent Venables is in. And you mentioned earlier, I think some of the good part of someone like Randall Stevenson stepping in and all of the efforts that Oklahoma is making to kind of be at the forefront of all the changes that are coming. Combine that with where this coaching staff is at right now, what is ahead of them in terms of trying to turn this thing around. I think the message to fans is that everything is about to look completely different. Everything is going to operate completely different. The rules in college football are going to make things different. And I think at OU, I do think you're just going to see you're just going to see a more business approach. And the hard part is when you lose guys like Jalil Farouk and Nick Anderson, like, you can have your opinions on whatever about them. And yes, there's stuff about the medical staff out there. It's been out there. It's hard to separate between fact and fiction sometimes, or things that are embellished and not. All of that aside, like, the normal college football fan, I think, and most people would say, oh, that's a shame, especially someone like Farouk, right? Who was a 4-year guy. He was a 2-year starter. Even Nick Anderson, who had a breakout year last year. At some point with all of these changes that are coming, you have to look at it like a business and say, okay, well, what's next? And how do we make all of this work in a salary cap era with stricter scholarship limits? Oh, and OU 6-6 and needs to get better right away. Like,
well, and
it's just different.
On top of that as well, like with the House settlement, and how much things are going to change. We're on the verge of these athletes becoming employees they're going to be employed by universities. And so, like, what does the scholarship limit look like? Like, there are so many changes coming up, and, I'm hopeful that it's for the best, but there is just no way, like, Jesse, there is no way we can sit here outside of just speculating and know what things are going to look like in a year. You just don't. Like, and that's not just for Oklahoma, that's for everybody. There's been so much talk over the last several months, and I have a hard time wrapping my head around how as much as football has changed in the last 5 years at the college level, there's more of it coming. And if you do not know how to adapt, if Brent Venables and his staff don't know how to adapt, it's a really, really difficult time to be stuck in your ways. So it almost forces your hand, I guess.
There's so much pressure on this coaching staff right now.
Yeah.
And with how many guys that have already hit the portal, there is so much urgency
Is there an
for
official number for OU? Sorry to cut you off, but I didn't know if it had hit 20 yet or not.
So guys, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 4. I have 14 as of right now.
Okay.
I need to get that.
Yeah. I
need to double check that, but that's what I have right now with McCullough and Anthony hitting the portal last night and this morning. I think fans are restless. Really, really restless.
Yeah.
More so than even when OU went 6-7 2 years ago. There's a tight needle to thread for this coaching staff. And look, OU's going to land some guys. They are. Now, I think OU needs those guys to be like headline grabbing names. I don't know if they're all going to be. I know they're really looking at someone like I'm going to botch his name. Ethan Anwa. So sorry. From Rice. Did I butcher that? I probably butchered it.
I don't know. You're the name guy. I can't even say guys' names that are on the roster right now, so I'll trust you.
So that's so true. Out of Rice as an offensive lineman, I know there's heavy interest there. I know OU's looking at a couple of guys. I mean, a lot of the position groups they're looking at are the groups that you would expect. It's wide receiver, tight end, and offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
As far as quarterback, I do know that I think there is some hope that there will be more clarity about him by the end of this week in terms of if he's even hitting the portal. And then if he does, what the options are. Again, I think you have to shout him out for sticking it through the bowl game with them. That's awesome.
Yeah.
But if you're Oklahoma, you can't assume that. You can't assume he's coming. That's never been a guarantee. Number one, ever. Yeah. And two, I think the hard part is I don't think anybody would feel amazing about Michael Hawkins being the starter next year. But I think you have just from the sense that he's a very young guy and next year is going to be incredibly pivotal. That's all I mean by that.
Yeah.
I think you have to, he's going to be the starter against Navy. And I think you have to, again, this is a really tight needle to thread because, you'd like to add a veteran and a quarterback, and you'd like to add a bunch of pieces at receiver and the offensive line. But I think OU needs to start having a contingency plan where Michael Hawkins is your guy next year.
Yeah.
That's the that's the reality.
You can't get surprised.
No,
you cannot afford to be surprised, I guess is the best way of putting it. And you're right. If there is a world out there where John Mateer isn't the guy, you'd better have a contingency plan. And right now, there is a world where where that is a potential thing that could happen. So, you're right. If you get surprised, Oklahoma got surprised last year with its portal exits and offensive line issues. Guys going to the NFL, they were shocked with a couple of the guys that left early or just left. Period.
Yeah.
And look what happened. You cannot afford to be surprised again, especially at a position like quarterback.
I would say I don't think most of these departures as of yet are shocking or incredibly surprising.
Yeah, right.
If there is one and a guy that I would not have guessed hitting the portal before even before the regular season ended, I wouldn't have guessed it's Dasan McCullough.
Yeah, I agree. That's the one that caught me off guard. Yeah.
He was going to be a starter next year.
Yeah.
And again, there's this hard thing where I think this is part of what's going to need to happen too, which is where OU's needing to cut roster spots. Guys are looking for, or at the end of the season, and this isn't just at Oklahoma, it's across the country, guys going to their coaching staffs and or collectives or whatever and asking for more money.
Right.
I don't know if that's what happened with McCullough. I don't know how much that's happened with any other guys, but it's definitely, like, I couldn't name you specific names, but I know it's certainly happening. And that's where part of these departures are coming from is OU again having to make business decisions. But like, even with someone like Dasan McCullough, you can feel good, again, assuming you keep these guys like Kip Lewis and Kobe McKenzie and, Sammy Omasigo, and if Kendall Dolby heals up and comes back, it still hurts to lose someone like McCullough.
Right.
It still hurts.
Yeah, it does. Well, and there's also the other thing, and this doesn't get talked about at all. There's also the human element in all of this. People talk about guys getting processed. Like, that's a term that's just become a thing over the last 3 or 4 years. A guy gets processed. Essentially, the coaching staff says, "Hey, we'll help you try and figure something out elsewhere, but we need your roster spot." I don't know. I can't put a number on it. I have no idea who fits that description and who doesn't. That's entered the portal for Oklahoma. I don't know who has been nudged at the door, but I would guess, because everybody's having to do it, especially with rosters being cut down, there's been some difficult conversations had in that facility over the last several days and weeks. And I, as frustrated or as anxious as the fan base is, don't forget, like, coaching staff's feeling that too. They're the ones that are having to have these conversations. And with the pressure that this staff's feeling to win and win now, I don't envy anybody in that room, or in that on that coaching staff right now. Because cutting this roster down on top of retooling it for guys that can play right now and be impact players, it's a tough spot to be in.
Not to mention that things can still happen after the bowl game, too.
Exactly. Yep.
And that's not just with the roster. I mean, you can even look at the coaching staff. And I don't want to speculate. I really don't, because this is not reporting anything. But Brent Venables has been adamant. He was adamant when they announced Ben Arbuckle as the new guy, and then he was adamant in the signing day press conference last week that they are wanting to retain, or that they are going to retain, all of the offensive coaches. You still have to look at someone like Joe John Finley. Is he sticking around? He's going to have opportunities elsewhere. That's just a fact. Now, it's really, for him, it's going to be, am I happy to stay at my alma mater, going back to a tight end co-offensive coordinator position where I'm not calling plays, or do I want to look to call plays elsewhere? Right. Again, I don't want to report anything. It wouldn't shock me. It would surprise me a little if everything on the coaching staff right now is the way it is in the spring.
Right.
That would surprise me a little.
Yeah.
But that just, again, factors into how, like, the portal stuff is not done. And even when the bowl game happens in 2.5 weeks, there could be changes that come after that too.
Exactly. Yep.
OU plays Navy. That's crazy. Is OU going to have any guys to catch the ball? I
don't know.
Bauer Sharp, again, which, I get it's possible that some of these guys that have hit the portal will play in the bowl game. I doubt it. I guess it's possible. We'll have a better idea. We're going to talk to players and Brent Venables on Friday. So we'll have a little bit of a better idea as to if there's anybody that's sticking around. But, like, if Bauer Sharp doesn't play in the bowl game, which I get it, the frustrations with Bauer, I get it. I understand it. They are legitimate. He still led your team, and he still led the team in receiving yards and receptions.
Yep.
You take away him and JJ Hester, And then the other guys that have hit the portal, like Andrew Anthony and Nick Anderson, Jalil Farouk, maybe they weren't going to play anyways, but now they definitely can't help you. Who's going to catch the ball? Is OU going to have to run 60? Is it just going to be Michael Hawkins and Xavier Robinson running the ball 70 times combined? Because it might have to be.
It's gonna be a the whatever the opposite of a track meet is. I don't know what I'm trying to think of a trudge. It's just going to be just like a very slow two teams running triple option back and forth at each other. It'll be like Army Navy kind of.
That game might last an hour. Like literally like an hour of it might start at 11 and end at noon.
I'll be okay. I'm honestly probably okay with that. It's nice to see teams still running the football. Honestly, I'm excited about the matchup. These games against the service academies are just so unique. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's on the schedule. I was honestly upset that Oklahoma didn't get a chance to go to West Point. That was something that I had made plans for, but for them to be able to, going to Annapolis would be cool too. But getting to play them just a few hours down the road is going to be really interesting, and I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be good for Oklahoma's young guys to get some opportunity, and with the guys that are moving on, it'll be interesting to see what the balance is on the offensive line. This should be a game that Oklahoma has some better athletes, even if they are, down to their third string in a lot of places because of portal exits. But you should have some opportunities here, and I think offensively, it'll be interesting to see what it looks like because there'll be bits and pieces that look a little different. But hey, 15 practices, man, that's the big part.
It is. Well, and we'll break down this game more as we get closer to it. There are still things to watch. I mean, you're still going to have guys like Logan Howland and Heath Ozida on the offensive line to further evidence to see, hey, are those guys you can build around? Obviously, it'll probably be Michael Hawkins at quarterback. What does he look like? You look at the running back room with guys like Xavier Robinson, Taylor Tatum. Even on defense, it'll be a lot of Kip Lewis and Kobe McKenzie. You'll see guys like Jaden Jackson, obviously. It will be fun to see a super run heavy team in Navy, how Oklahoma deals with that. It'll be interesting to see what OU's offense actually looks like, who's on the field, who's getting snaps, and what does it actually look like. And I'll tell you this, Brian, is anybody going to be that invested in this game? No, but 7-6 sounds a hell of a lot better than 6-7.
No doubt.
I can tell you that much. You know how, it's just one game. Yes, it's the Armed Forces Bowl. Yes, it's Navy. I get all that. But having 2 6-7 seasons in 3 years would feel pretty damn deflating, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I actually think there is going to be real pressure, relatively pressure and some pride to win this game.
Mm-hmm.
And there will be things to watch.
Yeah. It'll be, finishing over 500. And look, the fan base feels worse, probably. As you said, the fan base does feel worse or more anxious about this 6-6 regular season than they did the 6-6 regular season at the beginning of Venable's tenure. I would venture to say you line those two teams up against one another. This is the better football team out of those two teams. As crazy as that sounds, 6-6 in the SEC and 6-6 in the Big 12 are two different things. So I don't know. It's tough. It's tough to know. There's been so many injuries, but yeah, you go out and you finish the season with a win. And get to 7-6, you move on to 2025 and really focus on the portal. And I think you've got some things you can work with.
This is the last thing I'll say. We're kind of doing this podcast at a weird time where in terms of the portal stuff and even bowl preparation, where I think we're seeing that things are moving at a slower pace right now in terms of the trickling of guys that have announced they're entering the portal and when that's happened. And then also, I think you're seeing a lot of guys hit the portal. You haven't seen a lot of guys land in the portal yet.
Yeah.
And I think part of that, again, is this is the first transfer portal cycle where there's a lot of teams who are feeling the pressure to cut their rosters. And again, with the salary cap stuff likely coming in the next 6 to 9 months, I think that's just I think that's changed the trajectory of everything of the way things are moving, given especially compared to the last couple portal cycles. I will tell fans this: like OU hasn't officially signed or hasn't officially landed anybody out of the portal yet. It's okay to be nervous about that, but don't freak out yet. However, there are still going to be guys that hit the portal over the next few days from Oklahoma, both out of necessity for OU cutting the roster and also just because that's what happens in college football now. And OU will make some moves. But Brian, I think I could say this for the both of us that Oklahoma, by the time we meet next Wednesday, there needs to have been some real moves made to land some guys.
Yep.
That's where Oklahoma's at.
Has to be. And we'll get to talk about the first week of Bill Belichick being a college football coach.
Did they just announce that? Or they just finalized that?
Yeah, he is going to be the next head coach at North Carolina, which is just incredible.
Bill Belichick in college is just going to be such a soap opera, dude. Oh my God, I can't even imagine. Good Lord. Well, Brian, that's going to do it for us here on this installment of the Oklahoma Drill. Appreciate everybody listening. As always, head over to ouinsider.com, become a VIP member. All kinds of behind the scenes stuff, and especially in terms of the portal, everything that's happening right now, buzz on guys who are leaving, guys on OU that OU is looking at, all that stuff that we can't necessarily talk about here, but you can find out more over at ouinsider.com. Make sure to like and subscribe here at this OU Insider YouTube channel. Make sure you don't miss a single bit of content that we have to offer. We will cover every single part of this transfer portal saga in the next coming weeks. We'll have the bowl game here in a couple of weeks. Hell, Brody and I later today are recording an episode of In the Paint where we talk about men's basketball. We haven't done one of those this year. We're going to do that, and we'll have that out tomorrow. All kinds of stuff you're not going to want to miss. But until next week, appreciate you guys as always. This has been another episode of the Oklahoma Drill. Take care.